bipartisan outrage over Donald Trump's Iran deal. Ironically, after a costly and very polarizing war, the only thing every political faction seems to be able to agree on is that nobody likes this. It's an agreement that ends hostilities, reopens the Strait of Hormuz, and boosts Iran's economy by unfreezing assets, granting oil waivers, and more, while guaranteeing nothing about Iran's nuclear program. Today, the condemnation is coming from across the political spectrum. Obama and Biden official Susan Rice calling it a, quote, jaw-dropping, horrific surrender document. GOP Senator Ted Cruz warning it rewards, quote, theocratic lunatics. The New York Times writing, Iran gets major economic lifeline for minimal concessions in initial deal. Quote, Iran emerged from a confrontation with the world's most powerful military, having proved they can use economic chaos as a weapon. Axios pointing out that Trump initially demanded total surrender, the full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, no enrichment, no ballistic missiles, and a say in picking Iran's supreme leader. Trump got absolutely none of the above. Now the administration is moving the goalposts, though, and trying to sell victory here. Listen for yourself to what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said about Iran's ballistic missiles during the war and what Trump is saying about them now.
The purpose of this is to destroy that missile capability. Why does Iran want that ballistic missile capability?
Can I follow up quickly on something you said in the press conference? You said you don't mind Iran having ballistic missiles. Can you elaborate on that? I want to make sure we understand your position.
No, I'm saying that if other countries have them, it's a little bit unfair for them not to have some.
Mind you, this was one of the administration's top objectives for this whole war. But now, never mind, it would be unfair to deny Iran ballistic missiles. And this about-face, it is not going over well. The conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board, writing that Trump signed a, quote, recipe for the surrender of the Strait of Hormuz to the dictates of Iranian foreign policy. The conservative Drudge Report showing Lady Liberty herself covering her face with her hands in shame. The Times digging into the way the deal is driving a rift among Republicans.
History demonstrates that giving billions of dollars to theocratic lunatics who want to murder us is an exceptionally bad idea.
Unless you were homeschooled by a day drinker, no one's confident that Iran's going to do anything.
$300 billion, obviously a lot of money. Who's paying this money and why? Why would they do this?
If we give billions of dollars to Iran, that money will be used to murder Americans.
I didn't believe it. I thought somebody was spoofing me.
The idea that we would have effectively a Marshall Plan for Iran and come in and rebuild Iran after they've been the leading state sponsor of terrorism for 47 years. They've murdered nearly 1,000 Americans. I don't think that makes any sense.
Yesterday, Trump said if the deal with Iran goes south, quote, blame JD. It sounded like a joke, but today the administration sent Vance to face questions from the press all by himself. And joining me now to break all of this down is Richard Stengel, who served in the Obama State Department that struck the initial 2015 Iran nuclear deal. He's now an MS Now political analyst, and Basil Smikle, professor at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. And he's also an MS Now political analyst. It's great to have both of you guys with me tonight. So, Rick, I'll start with you. I think this is sort of the central question people are scratching their heads with this week, which is there a single thing in this deal, as it stands right now, that required us to go to war, that could not have been achieved through conversation, through diplomacy, anything that justifies all the people who lost their lives, the bombs that were dropped?
You know, Antonio, that is the issue. I mean, it was an unforced war. It was a war of choice. There was no existential threat to America. And that was the initial mistake. That's the original sin. I do think we need to, carve out a difference between why some people are objecting to it and others. Some conservative Republicans are objecting to the treaty because we haven't continued bombing the heck out of them.
Right.
I mean, I'm not in favor of that, and progressives are not in favor of that. Progressives are unhappy because the war was started without a reason, and then it was settled with this incredible windfall to the Iranians. And so I don't ever like to rejoice on America capitulating to somebody else and the mistakes that Donald Trump made. But again, it was an initial mistake, and it was compounded by the settlement, which was driven by economic factors. And, it turns out that the Iranians do have a nuclear weapon. It's called the Strait of Hormuz.
Basil, how do you see Republicans now dealing with this mess that the president has put out? They're obviously reacting very publicly, but they are going to have to go back to their constituents and answer for the fact that 13 Americans have died. Yep. More than 3,000 Iranians died. That doesn't even include people in Lebanon. And as we are finding out here, Lebanon is very much a front in this war. The military spent nearly $30 billion. Some analysts actually have it higher than that. And this has cost the U.S. economy $132 billion. If you're a Republican and you go to a constituent and they're asking you about all this, what do you even say?
Well, if, on the one hand, you would say, believe in your president, but the voter is not going to have a lot of evidence or opportunity to really have that feeling and engagement with their president, because there's a inconsistency that comes from this White House that is astonishing. I listened to Susan Rice the other day explain the Obama deal. She was incredibly bright, brilliant. It was smart. It was evidence-based. It was thoughtful. It's exactly what you would want to hear from an administration, everything that this administration is not. So what the Republican voters are hearing is just a lot of noise, and from that, an inability to make sense of the path forward. And to pull a thread from something that you said, there are multiple constituencies within the Republican Party on this, right? You have the isolationists that didn't want this at all. You have some populists who want America to be strong, want the president to be strong, so they don't like the fact that there seems to be some capitulation here. And then there were others that would probably want him to do so much more damage, right? And one of the points that you made in the tease is that they wanted a say in who becomes the next leader. Mm-hmm. That sounds like regime change to me. And when you bring that to the voter, right, particularly his base, who was largely isolationist, they're going to be like, wait, we didn't sign up for this. And I don't think there is a response that comes from this White House that either A, assuages their concern, or B, is able to take away from the economics of this that seem like they impact the president more than the country in a positive way.
Well, there's the people who may be kind of wondering about the regime change piece of it, because it was so much a part of the drumbeat leading up to this moment. But there are also Iranian Americans who were very much, they believed that they came on our air. Yeah, that's right. And they said they actually did believe that all this was a good idea. They were hoping for regime change. We saw our government, also the Israeli government, send signals to people in Iran, rise up, this is your moment. Mm-hmm. There's all the reporting around an effort to arm people. And so you can't even blame them for believing that something there was going to change. Rick, when you look at the facts now, did any part of the Iranian political system change for the better?
You brought up a good point, which we haven't heard enough about in the last few days, is that the other victim here is the Iranian people. Yeah. Right? We have kind of betrayed them. We said, look, we're going to support you in your democratic efforts. And what has happened, and this always happens when a country is bombed from afar, is that the very conservatives band together. And so the Revolutionary Guard now is even more conservative than it was before. And so it's put the Iranian people in an impossible position. They saw us as an ally. And as you say, lots of Iranian Americans were saying, yes, please do this. And now they're in a worse position than they were before. And that goes not only for the Iranian people, it goes for our other allies. It goes for our Gulf allies are in a worse position. The Israelis are in a worse position. And, of course, we are in a worse position.
Just an important piece to that, too, because we had that same conversation with Venezuela, right? That, yes, you had a lot of Venezuela Americans that were saying, you know what, the guy was bad, he should probably go. And so they were cheering what the president did. That's all well and good. But the question is, how many more of these conflicts will America enter into haphazardly or half-assed, right? How often are we going to be able to do that and still focus on what's happening here at home?
Well, I can tell you, as someone with family living in Cuba, they are watching everything that's happening in Iran very, very closely right now. And there is a community here in the United States, of course, that seems to believe that what could happen there would be just as simple as what happened in Venezuela. And even while that is cleaner sort of on the surface, the reality is the Venezuelans don't have democracy either. No elections yet. Delcy Rodriguez was a crook, too. She's now running the place. She's elevated a guy who used to torture people into a key position in the government. I mean, the idea that we've really done regime change there hasn't quite worked out either.
And in the agreement, I mean, it was kind of it's amazing to read the agreement. In the agreement, we also say, we're not going to meddle in your affairs.
We do,
right.
yeah.
Right.
No. We've already, Trump has already betrayed that, but,
What do you make of J.D. Vance in this moment? And just, I mean, the messaging he's done. He's been on this media tour. Part of that's because he has a book out. The other part of it is it seems like Trump and Marco Rubio have kind of shoved him out there. Like, you clean this mess up.
Well, and the irony, as you know, Antonia, is that he was the one person who objected to us invading Iran. He was the one person in the Situation Room who said, hey, let's not do this. He has always been a kind of isolationist. Let's not get involved in foreign wars. He's being a good soldier. He's being a good soldier because he wants to have the endorsement of Trump when he runs for president. But it's a complicated position for him to be in.
Joining us now, MS Now political analyst and co-founder of Punchbowl News, Jake Sherman, host of the Fast Politics podcast, and MS Now political analyst, Molly Jong-Fast, staff writer at The Atlantic covering national security and the Department of Justice, Sarah Fitzpatrick, good to have you, and former White House press secretary under President Joe Biden, former Department of State spokesperson under the Obama administration, and of course the host of MS Now's The Briefing, Jen Psaki. Okay, Jake, I will begin with you because this is your lane most of all. Tell me about the ways in which you're seeing Congress break off, potentially defy Donald Trump, and where it could be headed.
I'll tell you this, and we could start here because it's probably the most newsworthy, but the number of Republicans, Katie, who are saying that this Iran MOU is such trash is stunning to me. I mean, I thought they would perhaps hold their fire until there's a final agreement. But we had Roger Wicker of Mississippi, the Senate Armed Services chairman, come out today and say that this deal would effectively erase any gains that Donald Trump won in his previous campaign against Iran. We have, just to take your pick, a bunch of different people across the Republican ideological spectrum, Ted Cruz, et cetera, saying that this deal is not worth the paper it's written on. And yesterday, President Trump said plainly, if other people have ballistic missiles, Iran should be able to have it. And he has no problem with Iran having a civilian nuclear program, something that, again, Republicans have been against for a very long time. But that's not it, Katie. I mean, you have a bunch of Republicans who are saying Bill Pulte, Trump's soon-to-be, as of tomorrow, acting director of national intelligence, is not suited for the job. The president has, and then on small things, the president has pushed Congress to authorize FISA, the warrantless wiretapping law, for a short period of time. Congress has not done that. So we're just seeing, and I'll name one other thing, the anti-weaponization fund, which Republicans just rebelled against, although stopped short of putting that into law. But they rebelled against it, and they were very clear that they thought it was a waste of time and money. And the ballroom, I think a lot of people are uneasy with. You'd find almost an easier time finding things that they're against the president on than they're for. They're resisting his calls to blow up the filibuster, to change the blue slip rules that allow judges and attorney generals, or allow home state senators to block judges and U.S. attorneys in states. So, Katie, it's quite remarkable, but it's not remarkable when you think of it this way. This is a president at 39%, and the midterms 140-something days away. Republicans are in a position to lose. They know that, and they don't want to be saddled with a president with, below 40% approval rating.
37%, according to the most recent Times poll. 33%, I believe, on the economy, according to, I think, a poll come out today. So, yeah, terrible numbers. Jen, you had just left the State Department when the JCPOA was finalized. You were working at the White House at that time. It is remarkable to think about what happened then, the work that was put in to get that over the finish line, the way in which Republicans, some Democrats, but Republicans and Donald Trump trashed it. Donald Trump came into office, ripped it up, then went to war with Iran, bombed it, and is now back to potentially renegotiating very similar terms to the JCPOA.
Well, we don't even know that it's very similar terms, Katie. I mean,
we don't.
Right now, we know very little. There's been a 2-page memorandum of understanding that's very minimal. And I just want to remind people watching right now, the JCPOA was negotiated over a series of several years. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of experts within the federal government working to negotiate that. Before the JCPOA, there was a temporary agreement among the P5+1. So that includes Russia, that includes China, that includes the EU. And right now, what we know is two pages of a memorandum that hasn't addressed the core issues. We should all hope, of course, that this brings a permanent end to the war, and this brings about an agreement. But yes, we don't even know that. So right now we're back behind where we started and back behind the point when Donald Trump ripped up the plan 10 years ago.
Jen, you're in Chicago right now. You're there for the opening of the center. Just speak to the whiplash, the zig and the zag that the president was talking about post Donald Trump's win, and I guess what it means to be at the center today with President Obama and Michelle Obama trying to look forward, remind Americans that it's worth getting involved. And especially at the same time, Donald Trump overseas signing an agreement to look for an agreement with Iran that maybe is as good as the JCPOA, maybe. What is that like? It must be a very weird experience.
Well, it's basically the agreement is nothing at this point. So we don't know that it's going to be anywhere near the JCPOA. But in terms of being here, look, this has been an incredibly joyful, incredibly love-filled. It's been a party, basically. I know that people who have been watching the coverage of it and been watching people's speeches. And implicit, though, in what former President Obama said, there was definitely implicit critiques of Donald Trump, attacks on Donald Trump, as much as it wasn't overt. But it was also a reminder to people, to your point, about not being nostalgic for the past, not living and sitting in the past, really looking to the future and the power that people have to make change happen. So there is quite a whiplash, because I think so many people who are here were a part of his election, Barack Obama's election, and now they've been sitting in this world that feels so different and unfamiliar and unrecognizable from that world we all lived in politics that long ago. But what he was telling people is to look forward. And I will tell you, maybe you already mentioned this, there were so many people who may run for president who were here sitting in this audience today too, and that's also quite telling. But that's, I think, for people watching, what they should be thinking about.
Yeah, you had Kamala Harris, you had Gavin Newsom, you had J.B. Pritzker, a number of others as well. Sarah Fitzpatrick, President Obama talked a lot about we. The center focuses on we. Donald Trump talks a lot about I. I alone can fix it. He surrounded himself with people who support that version of presidential rule. It's all up to him. Defer to him. Say yes to him. Make him feel good about anything that he might want. You've done a lot of reporting regarding how that's panning out and the frustration that it is inspiring. Explain.
Look, I think that traditionally this president and this White House has viewed the way that they do business as a one-way street, that orders come from the White House and the rest of government, it's their job to figure it out. But I think we are seeing in this moment around the Iran war, around a couple of these the weaponization fund, et cetera, we're finally seeing the disconnect between what Republicans have been saying in Congress behind the scenes and what they are willing to say in public. And we're now seeing that delta shorten, because Republicans are so frustrated that they are left essentially having to account for these policies that they weren't involved in, that they did not authorize, and that they, quite frankly, believe to be really problematic from a military perspective as well as from a political perspective in selling this to voters a couple months away. So I do think that we are finally seeing for the American public what has only been happening behind closed doors, which is a lot of anger and frustration. And I think, too, we're also seeing what happens when you have a we talk so much about, I cover national security in the Justice Department. These institutions are built on expertise, that you have people who are thinking about downside risk, who are thinking about scenarios, who are thinking about bringing in all of the information that is changing on a minute-to-minute basis and bringing that into your planning. But when that infrastructure is purged, essentially, and when views of dissent, even not outright, but just questioning or thinking of a new idea, are viewed as not being in alignment with the president and not being loyal to the president, you see these things move forward at such a rapid pace without the rest of the party or the rest of the Congress behind them. And so I think we're seeing a lot of situations that are of their own making that are putting this White House in a very, very difficult position because ultimately they do have Congress to answer to.
Yeah, and why this is happening now? I mean, I think Republicans, advisors, everybody around Donald Trump or the party would be able to, as they have done, swallow a lot more if Donald Trump's approval ratings, his popularity was as high as it has historically been. Yes, he's still very powerful, Molly, in the primaries. We've seen that. But when you look at the overall numbers, they are not good. I mean, we talked about it at the top. 37% overall approval, according to the Times. 33, it's around there, on the economy. That enables a lot of this dissent that might otherwise be, shoved under the rug.
Yeah, I think it's also the sheer self-inflicted nature of this. Remember, when Donald Trump went into Iran, he could never articulate why. And in fact, there are a number of reasons. We've heard every reason from Marco Rubio saying that Netanyahu had told him to Trump saying it was nukes, it was missiles, it was this, it was that. And so that was just this was just an injury that he inflicted on his own administration. And gas prices went up, as everyone said they would. And even it reminds me of like all of the beautification projects in D.C. Remember, Trump made this whole thing about this reflecting pool. $14 million later, it has the largest algae bloom going. These are just Trump could have just been president and not done all this foreign adventuring, and gas prices wouldn't have gone up and polling wouldn't have gone down. Trump has done a lot of things that Democrats don't like that are, problematic in any number of reasons, but he managed to do things that also just alienated Republican voters, like the gas prices. And, this is a president who ran on two things: ending foreign wars and bringing down the price of things.
High prices are a burden for the American people. But the recent past need not be prologue. I am pleased to report that members of the FOMC are unambiguous and unanimous. This committee will deliver price stability.
That is Kevin Warsh speaking yesterday after leading his first meeting as chairman of the Federal Reserve. The Fed voted unanimously, as he said there, to keep rates unchanged for the fourth consecutive meeting. But with inflation at a 3-year high, board members were split on what the central bank might do in the future, with half signaling support for a rate hike later this year. Let's bring in former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner, with charts looking at the Federal Reserve's meeting yesterday. Steve, good morning. Always great to see you with the charts. So Kevin Warsh installed by President Trump as someone he hoped would cut rates. Kevin Warsh did not cut rates. He was not alone. It was a unanimous vote on that board. So let's start first by looking at the state of the economy, which may give us some hints as to where the Fed could go next.
Yeah, Willie, that's exactly the point. The president wanted a Fed chairman who would cut rates. He was lambasted the previous chairman for not cutting rates, and he didn't get what he wanted yesterday, and he made a few comments about that as well. But let's look at why. There are really two reasons. First is inflation. As you saw in that clip, he emphasized the importance of price stability, or at least very low inflation for American consumers. But, of course, that's not what's been happening, particularly since the war. These are three measures of inflation. I'm not going to get into the details of each of them. But this is what consumers see, 4.2%, including those higher gas prices. Since the war began, it shot up. This is the measure that the Fed likes to look at, and it's at 3.3% relative to the Fed's target of 2% down here. So this is why Kevin Warsh is so emphatic about prices. The other thing that's going on, which is interesting, is we've now had 3 strong months of job creation, averaging close to 200,000 jobs a month, compared to very flat and even down jobs earlier in the year. So the economy is showing more strength than expected, which doesn't augur for rate cuts, plus the inflation, which argues for rate increases.
All right, we have to have, Steve, as you move to your second chart, President Trump reacting to the news that the rates would not be cut. Let's take a look.
Did you see the Fed decision? They held rates today. Did you see that?
It's all right. Whatever.
And it looks like they might even raise them later this year. It's not clear. Do you have any comment?
It could happen. I mean, it's hard to believe. It just keeps the country down, you know. So it's so unusual. But we have a very good guy over there now, so I'm guided by what he wants.
It's not that unusual, is it, Steve, given the state of the economy, to keep rates where they are?
No, that's the weird thing. The president doesn't really seem to grasp some elements of basic economics. When inflation is too high, you have to raise interest rates to bring it down. That's just simply the way it all works. And so here's what people are looking at. The Fed has been holding rates steady for the last few months at 3.6%. At the previous meeting back in March, the members of the FOMC expected rates to come down. Everybody expected rates to come down, as they had been. But with the war and the upsurge in inflation, that's not what we're looking at now. The committee thinks rates are going to go up by the end of the year. You probably can't see all these little dots, but the committee was actually quite divided about it. But nonetheless, rates on average are expected to go up. The market actually is even more pessimistic. It doesn't think they're going to be, it thinks the rate increase will be larger, and it doesn't think there are going to be any cuts. The FOMC does believe we'll start to get cuts out in 2027 and 28, but much less than what they thought back at the March meeting. So, yeah, that's what we're looking at there. Now, inflation, the FOMC also believes is still going to stay higher for longer. This is what they believed last December, inflation coming down there. This is what they believed in March, inflation coming down there. This is what they now believe, which is actually not much change at all in inflation in 2027, and then a much more gradual decline. So what are consumers looking at? They're looking at higher prices for longer, and they're looking at higher rates for longer, none of which is making the president happy and doesn't make any of us happy, but that's the reality.
So, Steve, as you move to your next chart about the Fed that is inherited by the new chairman, Kevin Warsh, can you speak just a little bit about Kevin Warsh himself? I've talked to a lot of people on Wall Street say he's a pretty conventional economic thinker, worked at Morgan Stanley for a number of years. And by that, I just mean he's not some wild-eyed choice that Donald Trump has chosen in other places across the government.
Yeah, that's a great point, Willie. To the president's credit, Kevin Warsh was probably the best qualified of the candidates that he was looking at. But he is, as you say, a very traditional economist. He was what we call a hawk, meaning that he believed inflation was something that the Fed had to focus on relentlessly and get inflation down. The president wanted what we call a dove, somebody who wants to cut rates. He thought he had it in Kevin Warsh, but not so much. But here's what Kevin Warsh is up against. If Kevin Warsh is facing not double-digit inflation, but the highest inflation any new Fed chairman has faced going back a long time. This is Alan Greenspan back in 1987, and then you had Janet Yellen and Jay Powell, whose challenge was actually to get inflation up. But this is what Warsh is looking at, and so he's got a tough job, and we're going to see how it unfolds. And he's also got a 12-member committee he's got to make happy. One thing that, as you saw, Kevin Warsh doesn't want to do is communicate too much. He believes, and I won't get into the yins and yangs of the debate about this among financial people of how much the Fed should say, but he wants the Fed to say less. These are the statements made by the average statement length by Fed chair, and you can see that under Janet Yellen went all the way up to 604 words, came down a bit under Jay Powell. As I said, they were trying to get prices up. Kevin Warsh, 132 words. So he's a man of fewer words, which is okay as long as he achieves his goal of getting inflation down.
Might not be the worst thing these days. Fewer words. We'll see where they go next. At Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner. Steve, thanks so much as always. We appreciate it. So, Jonathan Lemire, we heard a little bit of frustration from President Trump there on the tarmac yesterday. He thought he had a guy in Kevin Warsh who might do his bidding and cut the rates, but Kevin Warsh, as was just laid out by Steve, is a traditional economic thinker. We got to bring inflation down. That means for now leaving them flat and then signaling maybe they're going to go up before they ever come down.
I'll follow Kevin Warsh's lead and keep this brief. Trump won't like that. Yes, this is. I think he'll get a little bit of space here. You know, Trump really a lot of political capital to push Warsh in. We know the investigations that went into Jerome Powell trying to force him out. He's got his guy. He's going to be patient for a couple of months, maybe. But I certainly wouldn't expect beyond that. And people I talked to yesterday after that moment echoed within the administration, that yes, Trump eventually, sooner than later, pre-midterms, is going to want to see those rates come down. We'll see if Warsh is going to have independence required to say no if he thinks that's the right decision.
And again, the signal is they're going to go up, not down next time. We'll see.
Today was a good day, a time capsule, if you will, a reminder of the kind of dignity and excellence, and most of all, hope that the American presidency and the American president used to embody to the country and, frankly, the rest of the world. As former President Barack Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, all living former presidents with one notable exception, and too many celebrities to count, it looked like the Oscars, gathered to honor the opening of the Obama Presidential Center Museum in Chicago. The center will act now as a museum, an education and community center. It's a reflection of former President Obama's start as a community organizer, which, as one speaker said, is intended to serve as a, quote, hotbed of hope. The event featured musical performances from Jennifer Hudson and Bono and Bruce Springsteen and The Roots and Eddie Vedder and John Legend and Common. Legend and Common performed the song Glory from the 2014 movie Selma, a reference, of course, to President Obama's now legendary speech, the one he delivered on the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma, and a nod to the civil rights heroes who paved the way for the first black president in our country. It's a milestone that former First Lady Michelle Obama referenced in her very powerful, touching tribute to her husband. Watch some of that.
To do it all as a first, and the higher standard that comes with all that. The claims that a U.S. senator and constitutional law expert wasn't qualified for the job. The lies about your birthright, your faith, your patriotism. The outrage when you stated the biological fact that if you'd had a son, that he too would be black. Yet, you were unflappable at every turn, always focused, always calm, always looking at the long view. How absurd it is to even imagine that you might have buckled under the pressure even once, lashed out in frustration, lost your temper. How absurd it is to imagine that you might have done anything but make our family and this entire country proud. No, you were too busy. I'm not done, y'all. Not done. So much to say. You were doing the people's work, rescuing our economy, expanding health care, ending a war, ordering the bin Laden raid, saving an auto industry, winning a peace prize. Keeping us safe from Ebola, regulating the banks, standing up for marriage equality, listening to science, and comforting an entire nation in the face of unspeakable tragedies. And you did it all with such grace and class and cool that you made the hardest job in the world look like a walk in this beautiful park.
Michelle Obama also reminded us that during this era, where the people in power are trying to take us backwards, despair is not an option.
Hope is the essential spark that lights the fire of change. But hope is a choice. Voting is a choice. Being a decent human being is a choice. Believing that we still hold the power to build a country that reflects us all is a choice. The Obama Presidential Center is a living testament to the power of choice, y'all. The historic example that millions of you gave the world about what this imperfect democracy has strived for and achieved. And an urgent call to go out there and do it again.
Now, that was a point echoed by her husband, the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, as he paid tribute to what makes us all Americans.
The shared values that make democracy possible. A belief in the intrinsic dignity and worth of all people, and that no one is above the law or beneath its protection. A belief in checks and balances in our government and an accountability that comes with it, an independent judiciary and a robust free press. A belief that our military and law enforcement owe allegiance not to any president or political party, but to the people and our Constitution. A belief in the peaceful transfer of power after the people have spoken in fair and free elections. These are the values and traditions I believe in. And they are not Republican or Democratic values. They're American values we can all share, regardless of party. Values every president here today, as different as we are, has tried our best to uphold. Values that John McCain and Mitt Romney believed in no less than I did. It is our greatest inheritance, the story of America at its best, because it reflects a basic faith in the decency of our fellow citizens.
That message of hope and dedication to democracy during what feels like one of America's darkest chapters is where we begin today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Executive Director of Protect Democracy, Ian Bassin, is here. He served as Associate White House Counsel during the first 3 years of the Obama administration. Also joining us from Chicago today at the Obama Presidential Center, former Senator Claire McCaskill is here, and senior political analyst, host of the Runaway Country podcast, author of the Substack, How the Hell with Alex Wagner. Alex Wagner is here with us. Claire, you're there. How was it?
It was emotional. And the emotions ran the gamut, Nicole. It went at moments I was, I was moving to the music with LL Cool J, who was sitting right across the aisle from me. And then another moment I was reflecting, how in the world does our country elect these two men, the same country? It was so stark and depressing in that way that this man and woman and their family led our country in a way that I certainly was proud of, and I think many Americans were proud of. There was no scandal, there was no lying, there was no grab for money. So that contrast, and by the way, Michelle Obama's speech, I have never seen anyone give a speech that without saying his name shamed the current occupant of the Oval Office, just by talking about how absurd it would be for Barack Obama to behave in the way that I think she was referring to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that people will study both these speeches for a long time, and that's why I kind of described it as a time capsule of this moment. I mean, the Obamas are always acutely aware of the moment in which they speak and how interpreted every utterance and every look will be. And she seemed to make some very careful and intentional contrast. Let me play a little bit more of Michelle Obama. This is number 3.
These folks aren't Americans too. They are America. They are the beating heart of this country. They are us, and we are them. And to ignore this simple truth, to refuse to respect the contributions and experiences of people who aren't exactly like us, y'all puts us all at risk. Failing to see the humanity in all people puts us all on a slippery slope. And once that slide starts, there's no telling where it stops. A dangerous precedent that flies in the very face of our faith and of the founding promise of this democracy, that all of us are created equal, that each of us is a child of God with inerrant value. And no one, and I mean no one, has the right to sit in judgment of who's American enough.
Ian Bassin, I had a lot of thoughts about both these speeches, but man, Michelle Obama is, I think, speaking for millions of Americans in everything she said today.
Yeah, I was in Iowa during the caucuses in 2008. I was there working on the campaign, and a family in Indianola, Iowa, put me up in their basement. I slept on a couch there beneath a banner that said Bush Cheney 04. It was a sign of the times when we weren't as riven and division by party, but we were united by what President Obama was calling us to, which is what we had in common. Yeah. And in that moment, one of the most overwhelmingly white states in the nation voted to nominate a man that they were judging not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. And after Iowa, I was sent by the campaign to South Carolina. One of the more heavily black electorates in the primary season, where I was organizing people who lived on the barrier islands off the coast of the Low Country that had been centers of enslaved peoples prior to the Civil War. And I had volunteers coming into my office, carrying with them the deed that their great-grandparents had received from the Union Army when they liberated those lands, and showing it proudly to us in the office because they had been denied real opportunity, even in the modern era, to have a say in elections for who might represent them. And now we're coming out to vote for Barack Obama. And in the final days of that primary, an unfortunate suggestion was made that it wouldn't actually count that much because it was just going to be, quote unquote, the black vote that voted for Obama. And I can't tell you the degree to which that deflated the hopes of the volunteers who had worked for so long on it. And when Obama won that night, not just with the black vote, but with the white vote and the Asian vote and an overwhelming vote, I was in a little crab shack on St. Helena Island and with volunteers who'd come in from all over the country. And the coming together of people from different backgrounds and different parties in a belief about the best of what America could be was a pinnacle of my experience as an American in my lifetime. And I think it is telling that that feeling, that sense of hope, that sense of unity, that sense of optimism, that sense of the best we could be is something that has been so sorely lacking for the last decade. And there's something incredible about the timing of this event today, because it's coming at a moment when the country finally seems ready and hungry to turn the corner from the ugliness and divisiveness of the last decade. And how fitting that these two figures can come in at this moment and help us turn the corner back to the light that I think they pointed us towards 10 years ago, that I think we can reclaim and keep marching towards again.